Welcome. I am thrilled to introduce you to Dr. Christina Bjorndal. She is a naturopathic physician, and we're going to get into mind body medicine for mental and emotional health. Welcome, Christina or Dr. Bjorndal.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, how did your professional journey get started? Were you always interested in mental health? Were you always interested in more integrative and holistic medicine? Did you have an experience that sparked that interest?
Boy, did I ever. Yes. So I haven't always been a naturopathic doctor, and it's been my journey with my own health struggles that led me to become one. So, just sort of high level, I have had 3 suicide attempts, 6 psychotic events. I've spent a year of my life in the psychiatric hospital, and mostly in that Western, seeking care from that Western world, which up front, I will say, listen, I'm not against some pharmaceuticals, but my philosophy for both pharmaceuticals and nutraceuticals and botanicals is minimum dose for maximum benefit for the shortest duration of time. Because I struggled for so long with my mental health and I was sick and tired of being tired and sick, and I was working in the corporate world and I reported to a CEO and I seemingly had it all together.
Yeah, that sounds like the dream, right? The dream job.
You bet. Then it was after my first suicide attempt, which left me in a coma, kidney failure. I'm on dialysis. I'm told I'm going to need a kidney transplant. And I'm like so upset that I am still here on the planet with everybody that I realized I have to figure out another way to navigate my health. And a friend had given me a book to read. It was called A Return to Love. And there's a quote in the book about surrender. And for myself, I realized that this word love was like a foreign concept to me. And I was the typical classic type A overachiever, perfectionist, you know, tell me how fast to do it and I'll beat the world record. And that, while that served me super well on the ego level, it was crushing my soul. And I would wear this mask. So anyway, that I have it all together, but you're never going to see me sweat. And I was really struggling on the inside, right? So anyway, that's the summary that led me eventually to see an orthomolecularly trained psychiatrist and a naturopathic doctor. And then lo and behold, I had my first year where I was depression free and I was still taking 5 psychotropic meds at that time, but I was doing that before and I was depressed. So I knew that there was something, to this nutrition. And, actually on that note, I wasn't eating very well still. I was also hiding an eating disorder. So anyhow, here we are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's so hopeful for people who, you can feel very stuck. It's one thing if you've had all of these traumas and, your inpatient experience and you've been so sick, but you've sort of like quote unquote hit rock bottom. But it sounds like you were like also in parallel extremely successful. And in some ways, that's harder or a different kind of hard to get out of and to make such a big life change. That's hard to do in general, even if you don't have mental health challenges. So did you have particular support when you made those changes?
That was really tough because I knew that. And so you speak to something that's really important is that if I opened up about the truth of how I was feeling, 2 things. One, I knew that people would send me into psychiatric care, which I've been there, done that. I didn't want to go there. And number 2, I would often get the response, "Oh, what do you have to be depressed about?"
Right, right.
Because you seem to check all the boxes, on the ego level. And so I didn't actually announce that I was making this change because I didn't think I would get any support because I had the dream job, but it wasn't fulfilling my spirit, my soul. So I embarked on this journey. And now, in hindsight, of course, 20 years, 30 years down the road, I'm very grateful that I was able to have the courage to do so and the financial means. Because as a single person, as a single woman, and we don't speak to this as much, I don't think, it is challenging to march through society, without some financial backing and support from a partner. It doesn't have to be, it's just harder, to
Yeah.
pay the mortgage, right? Put the food on the table, cook the food, do it all, we're not meant to do it life alone.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's an important thing to talk about in general, because I think so let's say someone is struggling with depression, or they're working in a practice where they're really working with a lot of people, whether they're directly supporting their mental health or they're just working with a lot of people with anxiety or depression. A lot of the tools and skills, it's hard to, when you're depressed or anxious, ask for the help that you need. And yet, the reality is that fewer and fewer people have almost any resources of support, financial means. In the United States right now, the majority, I think it's 60% of Americans, literally can't afford to feed themselves every day. And so we know from the data that just having one or two close friends that you feel like you can tell everything to is all you really need. And yet fewer and fewer people have even one or two close friends. So those resources, financial and relational, are really foundational to being able to recover. So you had enough. Here's the benefit of being, having that strong type A ego. You had enough energy from somewhere to make that change. Then maybe it wasn't the perfect way to do it. Maybe it would have been better with more support, but you were able to muscle through it initially. So now, when you are in your practice sitting with someone struggling with significant depression or anxiety, where do you begin?
So what I explain is there's 4 aspects to us as people: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. And think of that like a pie, a circle. And those are 4 quarters to that pie. So the physical level is where most people start. And with that, we want to understand that there's 3 macro systems driving that physical body or train within you. So your neurotransmitters, your hormones, and your organs of detoxification. Now, I started on that physical level, and those building blocks include nutrition, sleep, movement, and stress management. So, most people they start to tune out when they hear, oh, nutrition, sleep,
Yeah.
but you and I know that those are the foundational building blocks of your health house.
Yeah.
And so then I'll just complete sort of the health house analogy. The next level that I then work on is relating to that stress management piece, because financial stress is huge, as you've just mentioned. Loneliness is an epidemic, as you just mentioned. So the way we navigate the world from a nervous system perspective is very, very important. The next sort of level of your health house is then we look at your thoughts and your emotions and how you behave and react in the world, and your ability or inability, in my case, to set boundaries. Okay. We're covering.
Yes, yes.
I was like, yes, 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 right? It's like, no, no.
Right. Start with no, not start with
No.
yeah.
Instead of starting with yes. So that's the second level. And then the next level is to then discuss the environment from 3 perspectives. The role of chemicals plays a huge role disrupting our physical bodies, and then the concept of neuroplasticity, and then genetics. So understand that epigenetics is what's driving the show here. You are not your genetic blueprint. I mean, you are, but you're not.
You are, but it can be modified in many ways. Yeah.
Because I always heard the whenever, and this is an important question too, whenever you're working with a patient or yourself and you've got anything under that DSM, any label under there, the often key question a lot of people ask themselves is why? Why me? Why? I ask that question a lot. And I'd always get the answer, oh, well, hey, Chris, it's genetic. And here's the thing, I'm adopted.
Oh.
So I couldn't verify the truth of that statement, and I didn't accept that actually as the truth. And I'm like, really? Anyway, then the next level is bringing in compassion. And then the top of your house and the very top attic part is spirituality. And then the last step is the 10th piece, which you're going to plant your house on a property that's firmly rooted and grounded in love. We always want to lead with love in any of those categories that I just talked about, because love is the driver here. And anyone who is willing to entertain the concept of ending their life, I can tell you, you are the furthest from love. I mean, that is the most unloving thing you're going to do to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can we bring ourselves back to compassion for self and love for the other, and strengthening. So I don't start obviously with all those 10 things, but that is the framework that I use. And I do start meeting the patient where they're at, and generally doing one. I mean, I'm an overachiever, so I always say to my patients, look, strap yourself in.
That's right. We're going to do it all over time.
Let's get going. So, it's really comes down to the patient and how much are you able to do?
And maybe more even pacing. So they may be able to do all of it or a lot of it, but not immediately. Maybe over the next 5 years, the next rest of their life, So you said earlier that you were in a place when you had your first suicide attempt where you really didn't even know or understand or feel what the concept of love was. And now in your practice, really the roots of your client's health house is around being rooted in love. So, how did you get from there to here? What are the tools and strategies you use to help people even define love and start to recognize love where it exists in their lives?
Yeah, great question. So for myself, the tools that I've used and so I start with one of the key principles of naturopathic medicine, which is physician heal thyself. So you can only take a patient as far as you've actually gone, right? So for myself, I have not only additional training in, but personal work done on the personal level in 5 types of therapy. When I said that it's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and that was a circle and each one of those represents a quarter of the pie, the mental, emotional, spiritual is 75% of the puzzle here.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's something we really need to emphasize because actually, in our coaching call, so we train students at the Integrative Women's Health Institute, and every Wednesday we do coaching calls around complex clients, places where people are stuck with their clients. And just today we were talking about, what do you do with those clients who are doing everything right? And they're highly committed to the process, but most of the time they've only completed that one first quarter. So that's so valuable. So in the 75%, what are your tools and
Yeah,
strategies?
exactly. So where it started with me was understanding that your thoughts affect your physiology. So your thoughts will lead to an emotion, which will lead to another thought, to another emotion, to another thought. And we have this circle. And this circle we can just spin in stuckness, or we can spiral down into depression, we can spiral over into anxiety, we can spiral up into psychosis. So the intervention, if you will, has to come in one of those 2 places. Either we need to start looking at the thoughts or it's both, the emotions. And there's no right or wrong here. You just got to enter the circle somewhere. And so for me, it started with, this general term of mindfulness. So I call it the 4 R's of working with problematic thoughts. This is a combination of cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness-based therapy and psychoneuroimmunology. It's basically, in a nutshell, just with the key questions for therapists or for practitioners to ask their patients. Number 1 is, how much do you love yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? 10 being the best. Listen, it is very, very, very rare for me to get an answer over 5. So that tells you as a clinician, okay, there's some self-sabotage potentially going to happen in this individual, or there's a major inner critic that is in the shadow recesses or forefront, conscious awareness, wherever they are. Right. And that is what was a driver in my life, was this inner critic.
Yeah, but that's why you hit all those goals, right? Yeah.
Yes. And compassion equally so was a foreign concept to me. Like, I did compassionate inquiry training with Gabor Mate, and honestly, for the entire year, I was stuck on, what does this word even mean? Compassion, and it's such a buzzword nowadays, right? And Kristen Neff is another amazing teacher for me in terms of understanding self-compassion. And a key word to help clinicians is this question or statement you can use with your patients, because the inner critic is going to say sort of, why are you not doing it good enough or hard enough, fast enough, etc. But the compassionate side of you is going to say, what's good for you actually, truly in this moment.
Yeah. What do you need? What would help you to feel well? What feels good right now?
And the struggle with a lot of us perfectionist, overachieving type A types is that we are stuck in striving and we are human doers. And we need to learn to be a human being. And it is through the beingness and the stillness that you find your center. And we need to teach people to not live here, right? But to get in touch with the heart, right? Because this and the gut, those are your first, I'm going to argue, the first two brains.
Yeah. Yeah. Not just in your, frontal cortex, if you will, but in your heart, in your gut. Intuitively, we always say when we're teaching about leading with healthcare from a coaching model is step one to sort of trust the client's intuition. They don't often know everything, but they often kind of know the best next little step.
Yeah. So I have a great little exercise. If you're up for it, we can do it.
Mhm.
And this is
Yeah.
something that your listeners can implement with their patients, or if, whoever is listening, it's do it along, with us. Are you up for it?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's
Yeah.
go.
Okay. So it's a conversation, with a conversation with your heart. And so what we do is we just place your hands on your heart and we just take a breath here. And if it feels safe for you to close your eyes, just to helps to get the ego out of the way. So we just take a breath here. And then I'm going to make a statement. You just repeat it, keeping your eyes closed if it's okay, and the answer. So the first one, you just repeat after me. Heart, show me where you are.
Heart, show me where you are.
And then just share if there's anything that comes up. Color, word, phrase, nothing.
Nothing for me so far.
Heart, will you lie to me? Yes or no?
Heart, will you lie to me? Yes or no? I did get a no there.
Perfect. Heart, have I always followed you? Yes or no?
Heart, have I always followed you? Yes or no? No, immediate no.
Heart, how do you feel when you hear I haven't always followed you?
Heart, how do you feel when you hear that I haven't always followed you? I would say there was like a gripping of sadness in my gut.
Okay. So just breathe into that gripping of sadness in the gut. And we'll ask, heart, why do you feel sad?
Heart, why do you feel sad? I'm just getting kind of like unsurety, confusion, like a little bit of swirling black.
Okay, perfect.
Mhm.
Heart, is it possible that you are my intuition dwelling inside? Yes or no?
Heart, is it possible that you're my intuition dwelling inside? Yes or no? Yes.
Perfect.
Mhm.
Thank you. That's it. Very
All right.
simple.
Mhm.
The quote to guide you is the heart must usher the mind into the zone of revelation by Joseph Campbell. Because what happens is, so how you use this in clinical practice is very, very quickly, it just took you through those questions. And very quickly, your heart had the answer, yes, no, right? So it's there, it's ready and waiting. It's ready. It's ready for you. But the problem is most of us are so busy up here that we cannot hear the voice. This one, the egoic mind is going to speak loudest and first. And
Yes.
the heart is going to whisper to you, right? So how I work with this is I just say to patients, brown rice or quinoa, chicken or beef, carrots or broccoli. Like just learn to tune in.
Yeah, like what do you actually want? I think that little bit of practice, we do a lot of that too. I think that people start to bring awareness to the fact that they like first of all, sometimes they just don't know. They're like, "What?" And then they're afraid to trust it. And then when they do, there's a real sense of ease.
It's really is that sense of trust that is important to build. And this is why we start with little things that are inconsequential, right?
Right. So what, you eat the wrong thing, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's because then when you do get the hit, like, don't take that drink or call your mother, or big hit like me, quit your job, right?
Right.
You'll eventually learn to heed the call, if you will.
Mm, mm. Yeah. And one thing I always say, kind of, especially for my clients that are in the midlife perimenopause transition, it's almost like you have an opportunity, and it could be at any time, but we almost never stop and ask people, other than like your high school guidance counselor, what do you want? Like, what kind of work do you want to do? What kind of life do you want? And so I think there are these moments of opportunity, particularly in women's lives, because we have, like, say, the postpartum period or perimenopause or postmenopause, where there are moments where we can kind of circle back and be our own guidance counselor by using that strategy. Let the heart do it instead of the brain.
Yeah. It takes a lot of practice, a lot of practice, like, and understand too, you bring an important point to the forefront, that, and this isn't a differentiation between men and women, because essentially we both have hormones, right? We all have hormones. But I mentioned on that physical level that hormones is a major macro system. And so we have so many hormones that are driving the show throughout our entire life, from, menarche through to menopause. And so it's really learning to be in the flow with your hormones and support that. But root cause medicine is important to investigate. Key question is, when did things begin? And one of my pet peeves is for women in menarche onset, or menopause, or perimenopause, or fertility, or postpartum, all the way through. Oh, you're depressed. Okay, here's some SSRIs. And no one is looking at this hormonal piece, and it's such a huge piece, and when I started my recovery, as I mentioned, I carried along the nutraceutical approach with the pharmaceutical, and initially I was better for 2 weeks of the month. And then I was not good for 2 weeks of the month, and I didn't know what that meant, because I am, I'm not in health. I don't have a clue, right? And then, of course, my naturopathic doctor, "Okay, well, let's check out your hormones," right? I'm like, "What's a hormone?" You know? So so
Yeah.
it's important to, I think the really important message that I feel is helpful, you can take someone super far just on that physical level alone, right? But I know for myself, I was being propped up with supplementation, and that is, I guess, an approach. But for myself, I felt like, because I stumbled when I stopped the supplements. And so then I thought, "Well, have I really fixed anything then?" Right? And that's where the fixing, the improving, the real piece for me was this mental, emotional, spiritual, starting with inquiring about, well, what is the nature of the thoughts I'm thinking? And then, because this drives your nervous system, either sympathetic, parasympathetic, which everyone will understand, stressed or relaxed. And when you're in a fight, flight, fear, fawn, sympathetic state, it's very difficult to really achieve true healing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so your clients, let's say they get to the point where physically they're pretty stable, and even emotionally they're pretty, their symptoms are stable, but then they start to do this work. Do you ever see that people become a little unstable for a while?
Yes. Yeah. And this can happen. This can happen. We can stumble. And so I do like people to understand that sometimes the healing journey is 4 steps forward and 2 steps back, and 10 steps forward and 5 steps back. It's not from A to Z yesterday.
Hmm.
That's what everyone
Yeah.
wants, is A to Z yesterday, right? So the stumble, if you will, is then we need to take a look at, what's happening on all these 10 steps that I speak to. And usually it's related to a significant new stress, and we haven't fully perhaps got to what I refer to as the shadow, the unconscious, subconscious mind. And that takes a lot of time, right? It's pacing of this process and continuing to check in with yourself and where you're at. Because listen, I have been at this since I was, I'm going to say 15 years old, and now I'm almost 60, right? And I continue to do the work.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a very important point too, that generally speaking, when we're talking about healing on all four of these levels of physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, you're never done. And so there's, I think, two issues with that. One is that we have to be very careful of being too hypervigilant, like never healed enough. It's never enough. Like we can almost get perfectionistic about this. Yeah. So that's a danger. But the other, I think, awareness factor is just it's okay if this is a sort of forever journey. Like you can always learn something about yourself. You're always confronted with new challenges. And so it's more about developing like the tools and the skills and the resilience than like hitting some particular health marker or whatever. Yeah.
Because sometimes I feel, with my profession, sometimes I feel like, oh, goodness me, it's so much, no wheat, no dairy, no sugar, no alcohol, no this, no that, like what, no fun, right? So it's like, that's stressful. It can be for your personality, depending on your personality type. And for myself, it's, as someone who is very much like wants to hit the markers and, I recognize that part of me, that striving, achieving part. And then I recognize the other part that actually, the one that just wants to sit back in the sun with a good book and do nothing. Yeah. And she doesn't get much opportunity to show up.
Right.
Right? As a recovering workaholic, so, but that aholicness, whatever your addiction is, and we all have one or more.
More. Yeah.
So, and this is important as well in women's health because I had an eating disorder, which was another mental health condition, bulimia, that comes with a lot of shame. So does bipolar disorder. That comes with a lot of shame. So shame is a really important emotion to tap into and to investigate. What are you, a key question is, what are you most unwilling to ever share? Now, I'm not asking for the person to share that with me, but if there's something there, so is there something you would be unwilling to disclose? Then there's shame. And that is one of the last emotions to tend to within ourselves. So we can tend to the anger and the rage and, the disappointment and the hopelessness and the guilt. But underneath all of those, at the very bottom, is shame. And doesn't get spoken to as much, in the healing context because it takes time. So I went on that tangent from the alcoholic, the workaholic tangent, but whatever your, addiction is. And so with an eating disorder for me, it was being covered up by perfectionism. When I quit it, I replaced it with exercise, very common. But at the end of it, it comes down to what I talked about at the very beginning. It comes down to how much do you love and accept yourself?
Yeah. Back to that very first question, 0 to 10. And I think there's so much power in that because once you have that awareness, like if you're like, oh, if there's a deeper not feeling good enough, worthy, loved, that makes it harder to just be more at peace in your body, even on the days when your weight fluctuates or you might be struggling with thyroid issues and your hair's falling out or you know and of course we can optimize those physiologic systems, we can improve your metabolism, we can improve your thyroid health, but I think it is valuable to feel comfortable at wherever you are in the process and really be settled and safe in that. and it actually accelerates the physical healing. That's, in a way, as you mentioned, the physical healing is the easier part.
It can be. It's very rewarding on the physical level because you can make like seemingly simple change, like, wow, let's just drink more water. Hopefully filtered and blah blah blah. But we have to
Right, 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 right.
we can make anything complicated, but let's just keep it simple, right? Or hey, now I've really dialed in my sleep. Gosh, I notice I'm not as reactive with my children. So you get like that immediate or relatively quick feedback from the change, and so then we might just stay there for a long time. But what really happened for me in terms of dialing in the mental, emotional, spiritual piece was the parenting piece because I was showing up in ways that I didn't want to show up with my child. I didn't want to show up raging. Uh, I don't do anger. Thank you very much. And yet here I was, right? Doing anger. And I struggled with that. And then I guess, like most, well, I don't know, I guess most moms, I do hear this from my patients, and then we feel guilty. And then we feel shame. And then we think we're a terrible mother. And then we're back in not good enoughitis.
Yeah.
Right?
And then that triggers the rage again.
Yeah, that was wrong with me. So for me, anyways, in my healing journey, I was always being presented with opportunities to heal those pieces, the mental thoughts, i.e. thoughts, that inner critic, the emotional self. Now, the emotional self I want to speak to in the sense that there's nothing to heal there. It's just more about, it's all about just feeling it.
And just being aware of it, like knowing what's going on, physically feeling it, allowing those feelings to express, moving it through.
And being careful with the thoughts, because it's your thoughts that will fuel the emotion, right?
And bring meaning to that emotion. Yeah. Now, how about one of the challenges, I think, for getting that deeper level of emotional healing? For me, I really think I see people heal more easily when they have some semblance of feeling safe. And increasingly, that's very difficult. So, either the people I see that struggle the most either never really had that solid foundation because of childhood traumas or things like that. There was just never a time where they felt safe. So, they don't really have that place to tap back to. Or as you were talking about, like it's hard for single women or unpartnered people or people that have had to separate from their families for traumatic reasons. When people feel very untethered, lonely and untethered and unsafe because the financial and safety piece is all on their shoulders. And I do think this is technically actually becoming a real problem because wealth concentration is being so accelerated. You literally have people who can't afford to feed themselves, house themselves. And there's a lot of pressure to keep up with that. So, what do you find is helpful when people just cannot get a foothold on safety?
So there's so much to unpack in that question, right? Because the first piece, so this is where the spiritual component comes in for me. And these existential questions, like, what are we here for? Like, what are we doing? Like, what are we actually doing here? And so for me, as someone who has attempted her own life 3 times, the answer for me, and it will be different for everyone who chooses to answer that question, is ultimately, for me, I am here to learn how to love and accept not only myself, but the other. Very easy I'm not going to use the word easy. It was hard for me to do either. Love another. If you're not able to love yourself, you cannot love another. Right? So coming back to that word love, it's okay, well, what does that mean? How does that pay my bills, Chris? Like that's great. That all sounds lovely, but that's not paying my bills. Right. And so the financial piece, we have to understand that we are social beings. Social capital matters. And this is coming back to the loneliness piece. It's not one man for himself. It's one man for everyone. So let's help out each other more. And we don't do that, right? In North America, it is very much this egoic culture of more for me and how much more for me. And that's why we're in the pickle that we're in, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
that's sort of the financial piece. So that, I mean, I would love to solve it. I mean, I used to work for HSBC Investment Management on a global level. So I get wealth. And that's one of the reasons I quit was because I got to the top, I saw all the money, and I didn't like what I saw, and I didn't like how the people were at the top.
Well, and I think what you're talking about is actually even more important than money. Now, people need a basic amount of money to survive for sure. But to get that, you actually have to be a social being. To be able to access more capital, you have to have the capacity to access more relationships. And I think that's a very valuable way to help people look at this, that by healing their ability to feel more comfortable with others, to love others, to help others, to care for others, does actually circle back to them and bring them more financial safety. It's not always immediate, but it pretty much always does happen.
Well, there's a good little documentary, I believe it's still on Netflix right now, it's called Join or Die. So, the title gives it all away. So, but it's important. It's, discussing this concept, what we're talking about. But the other thing that's really important to understand, if you are someone, hey, for example, who is depressed right now, and, it is challenging to, so we know we need to help people with, and so your question was really also about the safety component.
Right. Because, of course, it's very hard to connect physically when you are stuck in either fight or flight or freeze. You're not in that ventral vagus activation. So, how do they feel safe even just joining something? Yeah.
And so this where and this is, and it's not as, it's simple for me to say, well, this is where working with a skilled practitioner can help you. However, again, that comes back to the financial piece. Well, what if you don't have the means to work with a skilled practitioner? But then I would argue that there are skilled practitioners who do volunteer, who do donate, who do give, and there are lots of resources. There really are. We just have to look. But here comes back the challenge. When you're depressed or anxious, the last thing, it asking that person to reach out for help is like asking a blind person to see. This is what depression does to you. It turns off or down your ability to be social, right? And I know for myself that this is a huge cycle I would get stuck in. So this is so when you can understand that, okay, this is what depression is doing to me. The cloud has descended. I'm now in the cloud. All I see is darkness and gray, but you're just in a cloud and it will lift. And you know what you can do for free? You can sit in the sun. You can get vitamin D for free in the sun. So I don't mean to sound glib. I get how hard it is. And I'll just speak to the movement piece. For myself, again, telling someone to, well, just exercise. When you're depressed, again, you're not leaving your home. There were days, weeks, days, months, years even, where the only thing I would accomplish in a day was moving from my bed, getting dressed, to the door, getting out, coming back. Sometimes that took me 8, 10, 12 hours just to do that. But I will tell you this, never once, not once, did I come back feeling worse than when I went out. So, and again, it sounds glib, oh, just exercise. Right? But there's gotta be, and it comes back to what we were talking about again, social capital, loneliness. Exercise is best done with someone. Doing something you like doesn't have to be exercise per se, but just walking, move the body with someone, ideally in nature. And we're so far from that, in our cities, right?
Well, and I think there are very micro things people can start with there. Like you said, I mean, literally just walking and sitting outside. Just go outside and sit.
And
Just,
marvel at the beauty of that sky.
yeah.
Even though you're in a dark cloud yourself, just marvel at the outside because it's a great
Look
analogy.
look slightly above the cloud. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think things that people can join where they don't have to do anything, like they don't have to be social, like show up at a yoga class or show up at a community meditation, or just like, there are, as you said, there are free resources in a lot of communities for just group exercise that if you go to a class like yoga or meditation or Pilates or whatever, you literally, just a kind of a tip for anyone who's listening, you don't have to do anything. You can like go there and lay on a mat. And sometimes you have to just start being around people. When I was very, very sick with long COVID for about 2 years. I was really pretty bedbound and homebound. And once a day, my husband and I would walk as far up the street as I could, kind of rain or shine. It took years. Recently, I live near a university, and they have a big contemplative sciences center, and they just kind of opened it. So they had a sound bath outside, and there was a ton of people just like sitting in the lawn, like literally on a bunch of grass, laying on mats or carpets or blankets. None of these people knew each other. Two people might know each other in there, but generally it was just a bunch of strangers like laying there for an hour. And that, I think it builds confidence. Like it builds the ability to do the next little thing. So step one is just kind of glance above the clouds. Step two is 3 houses down. Step three is sit among other people outside. And, this happens when, my issue was not social, it was just more physiologic fatigue. But that can lead to depression, especially for people who are used to being very highly athletic. So, but there's so much you gain from those baby step pieces that help physically and emotionally.
That's right. I just did a sound bath on Monday night.
They're so nice. It was awesome.
But
Yeah.
you highlight a big and really important point, because fatigue is a major symptom of depression, right? And so again, we're not asking you to put those shoes on and run a marathon. We're asking you to just put those shoes on and stand outside. That's it. That's it. Right. And then, build from there. The rates of suicide are actually highest in June, which is interesting because I would have thought, if you'd asked me, I would have said January. But interestingly enough, all my suicide attempts have been in June, which is like, I didn't make the connection when I was asked to do this research on the subject, even with my own self. So anyway, what ended up moving the needle after was for me was a friend asking me to play tennis. So I went begrudgingly, unwillingly, in my dark state, and I by the end of that summer, the depression had lifted. There were a few other things and changes that I made, but look at what that one thing got me. That one thing. First of all, the willingness is really important. Take the willingness. I didn't have the willingness, but I went anyway. Sometimes you got to show up in spite of yourself or despite yourself, right? Then outside, I'm hitting a ball. I'm pounding out my rage on that ball. Whoever that ball was, somebody's head usually.
Right.
I'm with my friend, right? I'm moving my body, barely. That then got me to drink a bit of water and eat a little more. In my depressions, I don't eat because why? What's the point? So, I had a pastor ask me one time if I had anorexia. I said, no, I got depression. Shows up because I lose a lot of weight. Anyway, so my point being that connection, community, nature, outside movement, we all know the stats. Movement itself is 75% for mild to moderate depression, as good as SSRIs.
Well, and I think so people who are listening to this who are practitioners, this is our opportunity to create small things within our community because, we're always rattling this stuff off, right? Like eat vegetables, drink water, go outside, move, but the very, very basics. But the problem is, I think where we are now in society, I saw a really interesting statistic earlier today that the number one reason people are using AI right now is as their therapist, as a friend.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Friend or therapist. And that is not good. I mean, it's not bad in the sense that at least there's a step one, but honestly, what people need from there is that little bit of activation energy. Your friend that dragged you to the tennis court. I was talking to one of our students the other day, and she does once a month in the summer, once a week, just goes to the park for an hour and teaches community yoga.
Nice.
Little simple. One of our master coaches does a walking perimenopause group coaching program. They just do it outside. And I do think that whether you just make it a micro part of your practice that's just in service, or it's the foundation of how you set up your practice, that's the foundation of the house.
So important to understand that at the end of the day, we're energetic beings. And this energy principle of give and receive, it's important to look at yourself. If you are the person who's stuck in depression, well, what are you not doing? What are you not? And again, I'm not saying this from a place of blame, but I know for myself, I get very inward and very shut down, right? And the medicine you might actually need is human connection. So it's interesting that you say that about AI, because I was just saying to someone, one of the things that I don't think AI is ever going to take over is the human connection.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't, but
Oh, my goodness, no. But the therapist part, for me, I think, okay, that's good. And it's good. My first response when you said that, I was like, oh, that's bad. But really the first response, the real response for me is actually, oh, that's sad.
Yeah, I think number one, it's sad because it demonstrates the shame part of it. I also think it demonstrates the financial pickle that this whole world is in.
It demonstrates this pickle that we're in.
Yeah, it demonstrates the connection, the comfort and connection with devices more than humans. The problem with AI is eventually you're going to lose the messiness of being human, the ability for people to grow and struggle and learn. It's like they get the exact right answer immediately. Maybe, kind of depends on what your description of right is. I mean, and of course, AI makes a lot of mistakes, but there's this benefit, I think, to having access to kind of like, give me a strategy, get me started. So this, I think, is a benefit. Someone can basically search like, hey, how do I get myself out of the house? And it might give you some good recommendations or strategies. But from there, I am very concerned. I think we really have to start leaning in as health and wellness professionals to creating spaces of human connection, because that is part of the medicine.
And it is. And you are the medicine for that person. You are the medicine. And it's not so much about the prescription and the fancy suggestions. It's about being with you. That energetic vibration from one heart to the next. You're the medicine. And I don't mean this from an ego perspective. I mean this from holding the space.
Yeah.
Not
coaching.
Yeah. And not filling the space. Not filling the space with, okay, here's what you're going to do. Allowing the person to feel.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. If someone wants to work with you, learn from you, follow your journey, how does our community find you?
Yeah. So I have a website, drbjorndal.com, or Instagram, drchrisbjorndal. I have a program for clinicians that takes them through this mental, emotional, spiritual, the 10 steps in terms of really mind, body medicine. I also have a program for patients as well. And I have my books behind Beyond the Label, The Essential Diet. The Essential Diet is, again, just starting on that one step, if you're looking for, because again, a lot of people, hey, I just want to work on that physical level, right? So,
yeah.
And like I said, that's where I sat for a long time until I was bumping up against these beliefs and emotions. So then I did the rest of the work. And so that's where you can find me. And I thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.